very low means in general and do not have the resources, and I don't believe that the opportunity is there for many local authorities simply to place an additional charge on their on tenants. I think in general, valuing social housing itself is difficult. Tenants have security of tenure, maintenance costs are high, you have successive tenancy rights, inheritance rights and so forth. And therefore I do believe that there is very good reason to think that you cannot value social housing as you would value other housing on the open market, because it is very difficult to give an open market valuation. And indeed, I would actually argue that some social housing has no value at all when you take into account the costs that attach to local authorities. I also welcome the exemptions that have been given to properties used by a charity for recreational purposes. I think it's an important recognition of social function. I want to make particular welcome for the exemption from the tax to houses damaged by pyrite. I do have concern, however, that it should be made as easy as possible for people living in these damaged properties to claim that exemption. You know, I suspect some of the houses damaged by pyrite couldn't actually be given away. That's not taking into account the trauma that people living in these homes have suffered. And I am concerned that the legislation provides for the furnishing of a relevant certificate, which is going to be provided for in regulation by the Minister. And I urge the Minister for the Environment, through your good self, when making these regulations, to bear in mind the difficulty that people have suffered already in relation to these homes, and that the cost of obtaining such a certificate shouldn't be such as to make it actually more costly than the relief itself. And I also believe that the relief should go beyond 3 years. In relation to the other new categories of deferrals, I think it's important to remember these are deferrals. These are not forgiveness. It is important, and it has been recognised, that we have, according to Stubbs, 25,000 households who they estimate will actually avail of the personal insolvency legislation. And I think there are many reasons to believe that that number could indeed be higher. I also recognise that there is an attempt there to try and deal with people who suffered particular financial hardship as a result of the economic circumstances we find ourselves in, and that it will be open to the Revenue Commission to decide whether such people are given deferrals. But I do want to say that I think there's a particular difficulty there, and I agree with Senator Darcy in relation to people who bought at the height of the Celtic Tiger, and I think it's important to recognise that stamp duty was a form of property tax, and it needs to be recognised as such. One of the difficulties with this legislation still remains: it doesn't know whether it's fish or fowl. It doesn't know whether it's a property tax, or it doesn't know if it's a local government tax. And it needs to be clarified exactly how much of the local, in inverted commas, property tax is going to be spent locally. If this tax is to get acceptance from the ordinary man on the street, there needs to be absolute clarity as to where this tax is spent and where it goes. I know there is concern among local authority members, particularly in the larger local authorities, that the local property tax will be used as an excuse to remove central government funding in a very significant number of areas. And I think that concern needs to be addressed. If this tax is to gain acceptance, there needs to be very sincere transparency and openness and very real clarity. And I would not favour more than 15% of local property tax being transferred outside of a local government area. I do accept there needs to be some transfer in relation to those local authorities that will have a difficulty in raising taxation. I have a number of specific issues which I would like to mention. One, the fact that areas of land in excess of 1 acre are exempted from valuation. Now, I understand that that mirrors the Succession Act and other pieces of legislation. However, in my opinion, adjoining land that is not used for business purposes, such as farming, is contributing to the residential amenity and should be taxed as such. This isn't a frivolous point. There are properties all over the country that have, 2, 3, 5, 10 acres of land adjoining them. There are properties on the Hill of Howth that have in excess of 1 acre. There are properties on Killiney Hill that have in excess of 1 acre. And they should be valued for residential amenity, and I think it is unfair to people who literally have a handkerchief outside their back garden that is not the case. I've made the point in relation to stamp duty. Another important point, I think, relates to apartment service charges. At the moment, apartment service charges, range between €1,500 and €2,000. And that's to allow for service provision within apartment blocks, that is privately provided and isn't being provided by local authorities. And I think that some recognition of that fact needs to be made. I don't know, and I can't propose how that would be done, but I think it should be done, because it is certainly an incredible burden on people who live in multi-united dwellings, and I think it needs to be taken into consideration. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Just before I call Senator, I'd like to welcome a delegation, a former colleague in this, Shale Bannon, and his colleagues from Longford Council, Paul Connell and Councillor Flaherty, and the Town Clerk, I presume. And I wish them well in their deliberations on behalf of the people of Longford Town. Thank you. I'd like to call on Senator Gillian Fitzgerald. You have 8 minutes, Senator.
Thank you. I'll only be very short and very discreet of the issue I wish to just acknowledge. I put forward an amendment in December to the property tax bill, and I actually was in the midst of all our debating on the social welfare bill, so I was at a particular low about the role that we can play as legislators. So I was all the more encouraged when the Minister Noonan said that he would take the amendment and look to bring it back within the finance bill later in the year. And I suppose it's not every day that I get an opportunity to very much thank the Minister for Finance, Michael Noonan, and his officials for bringing forward the amendment for properties used by a charity for recreational activities. In particular, he cites the Guides and Scouts. Youth work organisations have faced cuts, cumulative cuts of up to 30% already. They expect to face more cuts. So any relief, even smaller relief, is more than welcome. I realise that organisations will need to apply for the exemption in order to avail of it, but I do want to formally put on the record I've received and I've been asked to formally thank on behalf of the Irish Girl Guides, the Catholic Guides of Ireland and Scouting Ireland for this exemption, which I have no doubt will be able to be used by other charity organisations and youth organisations throughout Ireland. So I just want to thank the Minister for bringing forward the amendment most warmly to forward my thanks to him. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Senator. Senator Martin Conway.
Well, I had indicated I could hear, look, but
it's the first round.
First government, I'm sorry.
But no, but
I'll have to go to government first.
I take the opportunity to say a few words. In the first instance, to welcome the Minister to the House. No tax is easy at Oireachtas, and certainly no new tax is easy. But unfortunately, due to the present economic environment and the challenging fiscal difficulties that we have, there is little choice but to do that. And property tax is a norm internationally. Most countries in the world have a very well established property tax, and a number of, I suppose, elements to this particular tax which are very welcome is the fact that it's set in stone, if you like, until for the next number of years. So at least to bring certainty to the market in terms of people purchasing properties and so on. Secondly, the fact that following on from the 2014 local elections, local authority members will have a certain scope in terms of what their local rate is set at. And I would think that with future generations of public representatives coming down the line, that this actual element of it could be increased, and the local autonomy, if you like, is something that could certainly be increased, because I certainly believe that political reform and reform of local government funding are two things that will go hand in hand. We have significant political reform in the sense that we have a completely revised, if you like, localised political agenda, and of course we are going to have the referendum in the future of this House later this year. But that, naturally enough, has to go with providing people with more autonomy in terms of raising funds and so on. So I think that certainly the 15% element within the property tax is something that's welcome, and personally I would like to see that developed going forward. This is a very important incremental step in our financial recovery, and I would like to commend the Minister and indeed the Minister for the Environment for what was done last year in terms of preparing people for what is going to be a long-term tax. This is not going to be abolished, in my view, ever. It should never have been abolished in the 1970s in the first place. So what we need is a proper structured, if you like, myriad of taxes. And this certainly is a tax that does emulate best international practice, and I think that it's necessary. While we don't like it, it has to be done.
Senator David Norris, you have 8 minutes, Senator.
Thank you very much, Last Gaelic. Well, first of all, I welcome the Minister to the House, but I just do so as a formality. I cannot welcome what he said here. I think this is a loathsome, vicious and immoral tax. I oppose the entire idea, and I note that even the Minister himself acknowledges in his script that this was imposed upon us by foreigners. There are a number of extremely regrettable aspects to this tax, and I'll try to list some of them. Now, it has just been said that this is to be seen as a kind of local property tax, local tax. I don't believe that for 1 minute. I mean, let's put this clear. We're now paying for our own bin collection. That used to be a function of the local authority. We're going to be paying for our water rates, for our water. That used to be free. We're already paying, and paying very substantially increased rates in motor vehicle tax, and that pays for the roads. So there's not an awful lot left. We're paying for more and more and more and more of the services that were originally paid for out of rateable valuation and so on. So let's not parade this as some kind of equitable local tax, because it isn't such, and I don't think it can be seen as such. The other thing is, this was imposed upon us by a gang of foreigners. We didn't come up with this bright idea ourselves, and I'm not particularly interested in the ping-pong between Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil as to who was responsible. I don't care a damn. It was wrong and immoral. This is taxing our homes, and I tried to get the government to introduce a section to look after home protection, and they didn't do it. Every successive government has failed to protect the homes of the people of Ireland. And I'd like to ask the Minister, and I know that he is aware of this himself, he may even be in this situation, because I don't think we're all that grossly overpaid after all these cuts and all the rest of it, and I'm sure he has constituents who are in this situation. They simply cannot pay. And what's going to happen then? Are you going to try and squeeze blood out of a stone? And the nasty aspect of it is as well that we've brought in the idea of the revenue, that you're not even allowed the opportunity to refuse and to go to court and all this. They just simply bloodsuck it out of your income at source, if they can, or defray it from your bank accounts, they have powers of attachment and everything else. And I mean, I have to say, we look at the situation of prudent people, for example, who looked after their houses, who improved their houses, and they're going to get another smack. Now, I'm listing every week in this House reasons not to celebrate 1916. We have evictions, we have soup kitchens, we now have rack renting, informers, because we're being told that the people that buy houses have to inform on the people who purchase them from them. We have apparently some kind of spy in the sky. Will the Minister be able to clarify that? Are they using Google Earth, or is it helicopter, or whatever it is? I mean, it's absolutely indecent. It really is Big Brother. And I certainly object to that. And I'm very surprised that people would prefer this kind of tax to income tax, because at least with income tax you can evaluate the people who are capable of paying. I don't mind paying more income tax. In fact, I'd welcome it. I think that's where the state should be funded from, centrally funded by taxation. And I'd like to ask the Minister, how on earth can you gauge or assess the value of a property? The value of a property is notional. It doesn't exist until it's sold. And it can be sold on different days for remarkably different values. If, for example, you're at auction, if you're lucky on one day or 1 week to have two people bidding against it, they simply have developed this irrational desire to possess this particular house, then it could go out to the roof. And the unfortunate person who, in one sense, is the recipient of a kind of a landfall of good luck, now is penalised and treated as a criminal because they're told they undervalued their house. And it almost is like the Nazis. You know, you have to pay for your own execution. You have to value your own house. And there's no way of knowing how you can value it. And I can tell the Minister one way that will be quite accurate to value it, but nobody's thought of it except in the little island of Cyprus, and that is, take the valuation at the time the house was bought. At the time the house was bought, what you paid for it, and then add in a multiplier because of the number of years and the variations in property value. Then you get a real price. And why should people be penalised for improving the house, for building an extension? Or, for example, I put this on the record. I bought my house in a very dilapidated area. I got involved in the whole preservation scheme and started the Preservation Society. I spent the last 30 years or so restoring 1 room per year. And as a prudent person who actually was involved in the objectives of the state in restoring a historic building that, through the negligence of the state, the whole street has been allowed to disintegrate, I'm now going to be whacked, apparently, because it'll be seen as a prime property. And I remember some years ago, it was on television, and I suddenly got tax demands for furniture and stuff. I mean, it's just unbelievable what's going on in this country. Load of nonsense. I suggested to the Minister we should have, and I have an amendment down today, that historic houses, listed buildings of historical architectural value and so on, within areas of special conservation should get an exemption. I mean, there are exemptions. They're all nice and all this, with Girl Guides and the Boy Scouts and their dens and this sort of business. They're all rubbish. I mean, there's pages of drivel about this in the explanatory memorandum, as if it mattered a damn. The only one that was worth anything, in my opinion, is the priorities thing, and that was brought up, first of all, in this House. And, of course, the leader of the Minister's party is determined to abolish it, if he can fool the people. They're very coy about the rationale of the bill. You get all this stuff about the exemptions, but they're really very little. Then there's the question of deferral. I mean, have you any idea? I know the Minister does, because I know him personally. I know he understands the suffering of the people. But, I mean, the idea of deferral is obnoxious in the extreme, because people have already got severe mental health problems because of the debt that they're under. And if you propose to defer it, it's only an overhang. In other words, they'll never get out of it. And again, we seem to be punishing the prudent people. So I hope that I will be voting against the bill, and I hope that what was said by Senator Hayden is not true. It was Senator Conway, that it will never be revoked. I'd like to issue a call here to Fianna Fáil and Sinn Féin, because they might well be in coalition the next time. Let's hear it from you. Let's know, are you going to revoke this bill? I'd like to know the truth. Don't be farting around saying, well, it's not the right time, and it's this and that and the other. Everybody will say it's never the right time to introduce tax, but it's certainly never the right time to introduce an unfair, unjust, immoral and partial tax that punishes people who have behaved well and produces a lot of silly...
your time is up, and I'm not sure whether your language is unparliamentary or not.
Oh, it's not at all unparliamentary. It happens everywhere. I defy anybody, even the highest ecclesiastical authorities have been known to...
Don't debate that. I don't think that's on the agenda, Senator. I think...
it's not on the agenda.
Please.
Right, OK. Well, I've asked a few questions. One is about this spying in the sky, and I'd like to know a little bit about that. And also whether or not there will be exemptions for listed buildings. And I put this plea before. You have people, and I know it's very easy to put photographs of their gardens and all this sort of. There was a very indecent exchange between Enda Kenny and Richard Boyd Barrett, where the Taoiseach was talking about his education, all these kind of personal things. It really lowered the tone of the other house. But what about the heritage house? What about the great houses? Like Clonellis, the home of the last O'Connor Donn, direct descendant of the last High King of Ireland, like Glynn Castle, like Burr Castle, these sort of wonderful places that are part of our tourism drive.
Senator, you may put those at committee stage. to.
Yes, I will, but I thought I got some to be movement on this. But you're going to ruin the homecoming and all the rest of it if you've just a series of unroofed mansions.
Thank you so much. You're so kind. Senator Jimmy Hart, 4 minutes.
Thank you. Welcome, Minister, to the House. I mean, the issue of property tax is an emotive issue, obviously, throughout the country at such a difficult time in the economy. But there are a lot of myths and rumours put out there, and one which is being trotted out by certain because we paid stamp duty and no one else in Europe have paid stamp duty. All of Europe pays stamp duty or transaction tax on their properties, and I've read up and stuff, maybe up to 10, 12, 13% between notary fees and transaction taxes. So this thing that people are misleading the public by saying because Ireland paid stamp duty, not like any other country in Europe, then there shouldn't be a property tax. Europe does it, and I think those people should maybe read up a bit more rather than discussing it over a pint somewhere and saying this is a good argument to put forward because we haven't really examined what goes on in Europe. But that does happen in Europe, and the facts are down there. Secondly, like most people, I have a mortgage, I'm sure, but there's 40% of the country don't have a mortgage. Some of those people may not be well off, some of them are quite well off. So I think to spread it out, I think is it's not spreading it out to everyone if we exempt too many people. But there's 40% of people who don't have a mortgage, which I think they can, in most times, pay a stamp duty or pay a property tax that has to spread. I think it's spread the burden through. I was a member of Donegal County Council when I proposed a second property tax back in 2001. I'm not sure if Senator O'Donnell was there at the time, but it was unanimously agreed by all members, I think 2001, but the government at the time refused to adapt it. They said it wasn't feasible to collect a second home property tax. Subsequently, they changed their mind, and the property tax for second homes was, and I felt if you want to come to Donegal and enjoy the beaches and the roads and the services, and you have a second home, you can well afford it. Someone who can buy a second home in Donegal should pay for the privilege, because I didn't want to be paying my rates, my tax to Donegal for people who pay their property tax to Her Majesty's government, but refuse to pay it to the government down here, which we were struggling to keep. And the same people are still there. They can afford to travel first class to America. They can afford to travel and get bailed out by millionaires for their health, but they refuse to pay €100 to Donegal County Council. Yeah. And I mean, I know people in Donegal who aren't very well off, but pay their property tax because it's their duty to do it, because they feel we want to keep Donegal clean, we want to keep our roads maintained, we want our beaches kept clean, and there's a bit of resentment there from locally, because it was in Donegal maybe the last century when people says, well, the British are over here, the landlords are buying our property up and developing, joining up farms, and they have the money. They're not doing it now, but there's certain individuals who are doing it who say refuse to pay €100 to maintain the lovely county Donegal is, like Cork, Mayo, every county in Ireland has this, but I think Donegal's probably the most beautiful, and I don't think anyone will contradict me, especially Senator O'Donnell there. But either you're for a property tax or you're against it. The principle of property tax, either if it's €8 a year or 800 a year, either you're for it or against it. And the stance, and Senator O'Reilly will make her own case, the stance of Sinn Féin in Lifford, they say no property tax, and you just run across the bridge to Strabane and saying we want to increase property tax in Strabane. And I have relations and cousins and friends live in Strabane. They say they're paying maybe €100 a month, and their cousins in Lifford are paying 100 a year of euros. And they say there's no great difference in the services. They get a bin collected in Strabane, but they may only put a bin out once every month, once every 2 months, basically, if they're pensioners. So the service that they get in Strabane aren't much different to the service they get in Lifford, where there is no property tax at the minute, which I think it's. And we have Senator or Deputy Doherty making a claim. He says we will abolish property tax on the local website, but I don't know whether he means that's in Northern Ireland or Donegal, because if he crosses the bridge to Strabane, it says that statement, he has to put a little asterisk at the top, and this is for UK viewers. And at the bottom, he says that if you're reading the Donegal, this is for you. So if we want to abolish property tax, abolish it in Northern Ireland, where you have no exemptions whatsoever, where every person who occupies a house pays a property tax. And the argument that this is David Cameron's law, it's not, and the people and he should admit that the tax is divided into district and regional, and the district tax is set by the local councils, which Sinn Féin are in the majority in most parts of nationalist parts of the Northern Ireland, and they keep putting it up. If it's good to have exemptions here and good to people with disabilities here to get exemptions, then it's good enough in Northern Ireland. So just, don't mislead the people of Donegal by saying we were going to abolish property tax, because I can be sure if Sinn Féin got their hands on the property tax in Donegal and the rest of the country, it would be a different animal altogether. It wouldn't be €100 a year.
Your time is up, Senator. It's well up. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I'll call on Senator Brino down. You're 5 minutes 41 seconds. So sorry, I have to allow everybody in fairness.
He just makes the final point that I don't like voting for property tax when it gives hardship to people, but I think that there's a reasonable majority of people out there know the difficulty we're in, and they're quite prepared. And Donegal will be maybe 40% of the properties in Donegal won't pay more than €90, which I think compared to their cousins in Strabane and Lifford, or Strabane and Derry, will be about 1/10 of their property tax.
Senator Brino down, the 4 minutes, Senator.
Well, this piece of legislation is going to inevitably cause huge hardship to many people across the country. Let's face it. The Fianna Fáil position is that we're opposed to the legislation on the basis that it's simply the wrong time to be imposing a property tax on individuals who don't have the money to pay the property tax. It's going to stagnate the property market, it's going to impact on the recovery of the economy, and it's simply the wrong time to bring in a property tax. When you take on board, Minister, that people, there's a huge there's at least 12% of the mortgage holders in mortgage arrears of 90 days or more across the country. There's negative equity, and Davy stockbrokers estimate that 50% of all mortgages are in negative equity. Middle income families are being squeezed. They're the people who don't get the third level grants, don't have medical cards. They're being totally squeezed at the moment, and they cannot take any more. Their disposable income is gone. They're having to sit down with MABs. They're having to remortgage and refinance loans. And middle income Ireland cannot take any more. The new vulnerable in our society is the middle income families, and they simply cannot afford to take any more. And they're the same people that are going to be asked to pay this property tax on top of the initial household tax. You're targeting the same people who paid huge amounts of stamp duty during the economic boom. Those people paid on average, the average stamp duty payment between 2000 and 2010 was €20,000 per individual. Together with local authority development levies, which was paid up to, in my own county Donegal, a maximum of around €7,000. People paid that because they wanted to live in rural Ireland. Now they're being penalised as a result of that. Now, this comes down to politics. And you can blame the last government. You can blame Santa Claus. You can blame the man on the moon. But the reality of this situation is that it's the Fine Gael and Labour government who are bringing in the property tax. It's also the same government and the same political parties who made a promise prior to the election in the Fine Gael manifesto. The words, an annual recurring residential property tax was unfair. Enda Kenny, speaking in 1994, said that it was unjust, immoral and illegal to tax a family home. That was the Taoiseach's words, the now Taoiseach's words back in 1994. It was unjust, immoral and illegal to tax the family home. So where do those words lie with the Taoiseach and with the Fine Gael party today? Because clearly there's a departure from the position that was evident back then. And where is the realisation? Where is the realisation that families are struggling? Look at the Irish League of Credit Union recent report, which shows that half of all adults are struggling to pay their bills on time. 42% of consumers have had to borrow money to pay bills in the past 12 months, and only 3 in 10 are able to save any money at the end of the month. People don't have the money. You can squeeze as much as you want, but you can't squeeze a lemon dry when there's no juice inside. And it's very, very unfair to be targeting people in this manner. This piece of legislation is giving exhaustive and creative and alarming power to the revenue commissioners. So the taxman is now going to be given exceptional powers to go and collect the money where individuals haven't the ability to pay. The revenue commissioners can bring it out of your salary, or bring it out of your social welfare payment, or indeed go a step further and bring it out of your bank account. Bring it out of your bank account. Now, I mean, this is highly irregular and absolutely unsatisfactory that the revenue commissioners would be given sweeping powers to do that to people who can't afford to pay bills. And in addition to that, the whole valuation process. Now, we know why this legislation has been rushed through the Dáil last night and rushed through the Senate today. It's to allow the revenue commissioners to write out to 1.9 million residential property owners next Monday. That's why we're rushing this through this week. And the revenue commissioners are going to write out with an indicative valuation on your property. Who gives the revenue commissioners the right to tell Joe Bloggs that their property is worth X or their property is worth Y? Who gives the revenue commissioners the right? It's Fine Gael and Labour, because you're in government.
Yeah.
How dare you give that right? And how dare the revenue commissioners write out to the ordinary people of Ireland and say your property's worth X, and then put them into a corner where they have to go and employ an auctioneer to carry out an evaluation. The average cost of an evaluation is €150. So what's effectively happening is that you're saying, listen lads, your property, it's going to cost you €350, but sure, go and get your own valuation, which will cost you another €150, and we might accept it or we might not. It could end up costing people €500 when in fact it should only cost about €100. It's an absolute disgrace. Minister, I plead with you, even at this late stage, to go back to the drawing board, because the ordinary people who own property can't afford this. Fianna Fáil put forward an alternative budget model at the last election, which taxed people who were earning over €100,000. We had it fully costed by the Department of Finance, your own department, Minister. It was an alternative budget, and it would have alleviated the hardship which is being inflicted by this piece of legislation. Please, Labour senators and Fine Gael senators on the other side, vote against this today. Stand up for the people of Donegal and across Ireland. Stand up to your convictions, and don't be afraid of going before the people if you do that at the next election.
Right, Senator Terry Brown.
Hirlik agus fáilte róta a rascatí and Channel. Minister, as you said in your speech, properties used for accommodation purposes by groups such as Girl Guides or Scouts will receive an exemption from the local property tax, and I welcome that, Minister. The bill also provides for exemption for residential properties used by a charitable body for recreational activities connected with its charitable purpose, where this is not done on a commercial basis, as you have also stated. Minister, voluntary organisations will be exempt, and I applaud the government for this exemption. The decision not to tax voluntary organisations, and I instance organisations like the Dundalk Sea and River Rescue. As I have to say, and I thank you, Minister, you visited themselves. We have many sea and river rescues organisations and committees along our coasts, and they work voluntarily. They give of their time. They take leave of absence without sick pay, work at weekends, and give up holidays. This bill recognises this fact of many voluntary organisations, Minister, and it is indeed recognition of the contribution that many voluntary organisations give, many voluntary organisations throughout the length and breadth of this country. And I often wonder, Minister, what type of country we would have if we didn't have totally committed voluntary organisations in every townland, in every town, in every village throughout the country, not alone along our coasts. I commend the bill, Minister. We have to pay our way. We have to pay our way. We're one of the few countries in the world that are not paying property tax. I commend the bill and I thank you for your contribution.
Thank you very much. Senator Catherine Riley.
I suppose I'm not necessarily going to go into the depths of the legislation, given that we don't have enough time and we have tabled substantive amendments for committee stage and report stage, but we know that we're probably not going to get through them. We have 45 minutes for the remaining stages. And last December, we've seen the previous bill rush through the Oireachtas in a shameful way also, and it is a disregard for the democratic processes of the two houses and the job that we were mandated to do as legislators by our constituents, whether they be councillors, whether they be ordinary people who elect the other chamber. And it is nothing short of a disgrace and demonstrates that the election promises that were made, the programme from promises that were made in terms of political reform have been abandoned. And as I said, at this point, given the limited time we have, especially in terms of substantive amendments, there isn't much point in dealing too substantively with the legislation. So instead, I do want to use this time to remind the government parties, Fine Gael and Labour, of the promises that they made to the electorate in the general election of 2011, which is only 2 years ago. In your manifesto, the document that you used to secure support from the voters, there was an explicit commitment made not to introduce a property tax for 2014. Pages 59 and 60 of the manifesto decried what you called the Fianna Fáil and Labour annual recurring residential property tax, and that was decreed as unfair. And you said you wouldn't introduce such a tax, Minister. Your colleagues in the Labour Party made a similar promise on page 16 of their manifesto, a document they themselves used to convince voters to support them. They said the time was not right to introduce a site valuation tax, and they said that any such tax could only be introduced after 2014 and must include exceptions to deal with those in negative equity, those who paid massive amounts of stamp duty. The Fine Gael and Labour property tax election promises were for people central parts of the election campaigns, and people did vote on the basis of those proposals. But yet, here we stand on the second anniversary of the foundation of the government, and indeed the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach only in the last half an hour made their respective speeches about the 2-year anniversary. The government are now voting through the second piece of legislation, introducing the annual recurring property tax legislation with no exemptions for those unable to pay, no exemptions for those in negative equity, no recognition of the massive stamp duty payments made by many homeowners, and no mechanisms to deal with the urban-rural variations in property prices. And as for Fianna Fáil, I know many other senators here mentioned it earlier, and I'll just mention it myself. It is hard to listen to them to oppose this legislation. It's their tax. It was negotiated by them with the Troika, and it was included in their 2012 pre-budget submission. But the National Recovery Plan 2011 to 2014, it was included. But now that they see the strength of the opposition to it, they pretend to oppose it. But everyone does know, based on what they've seen in the past, that if they were themselves in government, they would be there imposing this unfair tax on struggling homeowners. To the Labour and Fine Gael senators, I would say shame on you for supporting this legislation and for breaking your promise on the property tax. Shame on you for punishing struggling homeowners. Sinn Féin have said that we would repeal this legislation. We would publish legislation to give effect to that. It is up to TDs to support that in the other house when we do introduce that. Now, I know mention was made earlier of the North and what is happening in the North in terms of rates, and including Sinn Féin of hypocrisy introducing or opposing the introduction of property tax in the South and supporting rates in the North. We all know that the regional rate that is paid in the North goes towards education, health, housing, roads, water, sewerage, emergency services, and indeed Senator Norris made the point earlier that we can say that the money that we're using from the property tax is going towards these services, but it's not. Whereas in the North, it is paying for that.
It goes to Westminster, Senator.
We will happily, when we get fiscal powers, look at
That's
the
right,
rates
without
in order to
interruption,
raise
please.
additional revenue and we're given scope, we will be looking at that. So we will, so we're happy to do that.
Senator Riley, without interruption. Let the young lady speak.
Thank you, Luska here, look.
We support the United Ireland, maybe we wouldn't have the problems in the north.
The difference between this government and the executive in the north
support United Ireland.
is that we keep our promises.
Give us a bit of a hand, folks.
47% of Sinn Féin support United Ireland.
Sorry, don't be interrupting the senator now, Fairness.
Thanks very much. In 2011, the government promised not to increase the tax burden on struggling families. We see very clearly that promise is broken. And in 2011, Sinn Féin in the North promised not to increase the tax burden on struggling families, and we've kept that promise. And that's what we're here to demonstrate. So as I said, we're going to publish our appeal bill. There is no amending the fact that this is a fundamentally bad tax. We have shown that alternatives exist, but the government has turned its back on
Time now, I'm sorry, but I've given you time for interruptions and
and it's only interested in further punishing struggling families who are already at the brink of their collar. Thank you.
I gave you 1 minute 28 seconds for interruptions you had. Senator Claire Clune, you have 4 minutes, Senator.
Okay, 4 minutes. Thanks, Claire. And whilst we've had the debate prior to Christmas in this House on the whole issue of introducing a property tax, nonetheless, it's another opportunity to put my thoughts on the record. First of all, I welcome the provisions of this bill, particularly the number of exemptions that are there, and particularly I think it's very appropriate the issue of for those houses that are affected by pyrite. I think those people, I feel extremely sorry for them, the situation they find themselves in through no fault of their own, and I think it is very appropriate that that a provision would be made whereby they would be exempt for a period or for certain circumstances have been laid out in the legislation on that point. Just a point Senator Breen O'Donnell raised about the property tax, he's saying it's the wrong, he agrees with the property tax, but it's the wrong time. Well, I mean, the arrangement was made with the Troika to introduce by the previous government. And what time would you propose? Because like the Troika are making plans to leave. If you haven't noticed, the news is good. So they are leaving. So I mean, time is running out. But nonetheless, I think it's important that we do introduce a tax such as this. We need to put our taxation system on a more sustainable level. We all know the ravages of the 2000s and how our tax became over-dependent on property, on the market value of properties and income from stamp duty, VAT payments on houses, unsustainable. Now we find ourselves with a deficit that we're continually making progress to close, but a deficit that's causing enormous burden on many fronts, and mostly on the people on this country. So on the whole issue of the amount of tax that will be collected, I would like to see more transparency in that area. I think there'd be lots of questions from individual homeowners, and particularly thinking, as I reflect a city constituency, and indeed I know the case has been made by many speakers for Dublin, but again in Cork, I recognise that because of living in a city you do have services that you wouldn't have elsewhere. Nonetheless, many of those services are paid for by taxpayers as well, and the bulk of taxpayers will live in those cities. This, we're told, is a local property tax, to be spent locally, and I would think that it's based on the market value. Obviously, more tax is going to be collected in the areas that have the higher market value, and therefore the consequence of that is the citizens will expect that more services will be provided locally. So we do need transparency. We need to see that will happen. I do agree that a certain proportion should be spent, should be moved across the country to support individual authorities that won't be able to collect enough tax to match their needs. But I do think that the fact that the bulk of the tax is going to be collected in areas that have high market value, and I think that there will be, individuals who are paying this tax will want to see from their local authority how much money is being returned to their individual authority and how much of that is being spent locally. And I think, particularly elderly people who find themselves now in a house that, well, in better times could be worth more, but the value has increased because of the services that have been provided in that area. So it's it's a difficult one for people. They find that they're never actually going to realise that market value. Many people live out their lives in their home. They will never actually realise that market value. Yet they're finding that will be paying a property tax based on a market value. So I think just the point I wanted to make to the Minister is I think we're going to be looking for transparency. Certainly, property owners, income taxpayers, and those who will be paying the property tax as well, be looking to how much is returned to their area. But I do support the provisions of a property tax, and particularly because it gets away from the focus on income. And we've seen that we need to reduce the burden on income, and I commend the government in the last budget that income tax were not increased. We need to spread the tax base to ensure that going forward we have a more sustainable position.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Fergal Quinn, you have 4 minutes, Senator.
Thank you, Laska Hirlik. Minister, you're welcome. Nobody welcomes any tax, and I suppose this is one that we debated some time back. So we're not here to debate the property tax today. We're here to debate exemptions from it. I'm going to make a few suggestions. Should we consider applying some discount if there are fewer than 2 residents in a house? Now, this could be based on the census figures, and in the United Kingdom, a discount of 25% is available when there are fewer than 2 residents in the building. Now, I think that would be interesting to consider in relation to this bill. More occupants in a house usually means it's easier to pay the tax, such tax, and if there are fewer than 2 people, it's usually more difficult. Therefore, I believe an amendment to the bill to have the same effect would be appropriate. I'm interested in the number of exemptions and if they should be stated explicitly in the bill. If a bank repossesses a property, are they liable to pay the property tax? Just a question. Are diplomats liable to pay the property tax, and are people in prison liable? Now, one may question why I've raised such specific cases, but it is the case that in some other European Union countries, these particular cases are stated clearly in the legislation and the exemptions are made clear. Do we need to state in a much clearer way in our legislation? Should we put an amendment in that way? Going through the bill and the original bill, I found no mention of occupiers under the age of 18. Perhaps we should also consider an exemption from property tax where there is a house occupied by people all under the age of 18. I wonder, should we also consider amendments to cut out those elements of confusion for the citizen, for the consumer? I'd like to ask the Minister that, considering the valuations of houses, could we consider an amendment so some universal benefits could be withdrawn from people who pay property tax on a house valued over, let's say, $1 million, $500,000 or whatever it is. Given all the problems with means testing and benefits like child allowance, could this be a way of introducing a more equitable system of social welfare? I wonder if we could introduce an amendment to that effect. And whilst we do need to balance the books, and I support this amendment to legislation, I think we must take heed of the wider situation, in particular the mortgage crisis. A number of people have mentioned this already. It also seems, from what I'm hearing accidentally or anecdotally, that people in the past few months have stopped spending. I hear this from a few business people. One, for instance, who runs a garage and says there's been quite a drop. And the thinking is that people are stopping spending in anticipation of the new property tax. And I hope that the government can take the message on board that we are about at saturation point at the top of what's known as the Laffer curve. Now, the Laffer curve is one which says that if you tax higher, you take in less income. If you tax lower, you take in more income. If there are green shoots of recovery, the government cannot go on taxing. And James McIntosh of the Financial Times wrote, I'll just quote, it's only one quote, Ireland has met every one of the 190 requirements of the Troika of the IMF, ECB and European Commission, overseeing the rescue programmes, unquote. Now, it's amazing to consider, but what is the reward for the Irish citizen for the many sacrifices that we've undertaken? I hope the government has some pleasant surprises for the Irish citizen in the next budget. Now, I've tried to concentrate solely on the exemptions because I'm not talking about the property tax. We talked about the property tax in the past. Today is the day to talk about the exemptions, and certainly we have to welcome some of those exemptions. I've made a number of suggestions there. Whether we put them in as an amendment or not, we'll see.
Thank you, Senator. Now, Senator John Gilroy, you have 4 minutes, Senator.
Thank you, Laska Hirlik. I've been listening with interest to the debate as it's unfolding here this morning. I just want to make a point or two about the debate first. Maybe before I do that, I wasn't here for the order of business, and I want to maybe just acknowledge Senator Byrne's running in the local election. And while we don't, in the by-election, while we don't want to wish him success, we certainly do want to wish you well. So I just want to say that. But that's the good thing. And now I'll start criticising you. The Fianna Fáil or the Sinn Féin position on the property tax is just dishonest. It's just completely and utterly dishonest. And I don't think we need to even talk too much about it. The Fianna Fáil position, though, is worse than dishonest. It's kind of ludicrous, because 2 years ago you were proponents of the exact same thing that you're now massively opposed to. And the arguments that have been used against property tax will say, should it be linked to income? Well, just say it was linked to income, then it would be called an income tax, not a property tax. Should it be linked to stamp duty and people who pay stamp duty? Should it be? Well, if it is, should it not be called a transaction tax instead of a property tax? And finally, the other development charge argument that people in rural Ireland particularly have built or paid substantial development charges. There's a misunderstanding, I think, about what a development charge is. A development charge is a contribution towards the capital costs of the provision of infrastructure. Property tax is a contribution towards the maintenance and ongoing services of providing those services. So they're rather basic arguments, I would think, and I would think for anyone to use them in any other way would be just dishonest and maybe demonstrate a lack of understanding of the taxation system. But there is just one point, Cahirla, that I want to make, and it kind of goes to the heart of the whole argument. It is one thing, and a good thing, and a healthy thing indeed for our democracy, that the opposition would robustly criticise and oppose the introduction of any measure that they find obnoxious to them. And obviously they find the introduction of a property tax fits into that category. But I fear that the opposition, while they are opposing it, are going a little bit further than absolutely just opposing a legislative introduction and moving into a position which I think is insidious and I would dare say subversive. Some parties have a history of subversion, but I'm surprised to find that Fianna Fáil are moving into that area. Because what you're actually saying here, it's one thing to oppose the legislative process. That's fine and that's your job and you have to do it robustly. But to take it outside the chamber and extol people not to pay the property tax is moving to a position where no, I'm not saying Fianna Fáil on this one, I'm saying other parties, yeah, that's fair enough. They're moving to a position where you deny the legitimacy of a democratically elected government to make decisions with regard to taxation. That is subversive. It's an inability to recognise the legitimacy of the state which we as parliamentarians represent. And I think that that is insidious and horribly dangerous. And I want people who are making the argument on the streets, do not pay this property tax, bin the tax, whatever you want to do. Street politics is not appropriate for parliamentarians. Absolutely 100% convinced of that. We are looking here at the very legitimacy of the state. Can a democratically elected government, which is elected to implement decisions in good times and in bad, this is the key to it. Nobody wants to pay more tax. Senator Quinn said it. I don't want to be paying any more tax. Nobody does. But it is a legitimate from a legitimately elected government. And to move outside that, I think, is subversive, dangerous and wrong. Thank you, Chairman.
Senator Lawrence O'Murk.
I don't think this debate is about a local property tax per se. I think it's about the inbuilt inequities and anomalies in that. I think it's about the method of implementation as well. And if you go back to the household tax, you realise there the build-up of misunderstanding that came at that particular time and the fact that there was a single charge for everyone. I accept it was an interim measure, but it has left a legacy behind, and it is in the background of the local property tax which we're speaking about at the moment. There's a lot of fear out there, apart altogether about the fear of not being able to pay, and that's pretty widespread for a lot of people. But there's another fear there on the question of valuation, and I think there was, to some extent, there was a relief for people when they were told that they would receive an estimated valuation. And that was it. And if you wish to appeal that, you could. Then after some weeks, it became clear that even if you accept the estimated valuation, you can still be pursued subsequently. That wasn't good management. I don't believe that was good management. And I think it recreated and accentuated the fear which was already there. And I would still suggest to the Minister today that we would go along with the idea that when you got an estimated valuation and you responded to that in good faith and you paid it, that should be it. If you wish to appeal it, so be it. But the suggestion that you're trying to do what is right in an area that there's a lot of misunderstanding because the attention is in the detail and the devil is in the detail as well, I think it would be well worth again looking at that even at this late stage. Is there? Yes. Because I think that's going to be one help. I have to say that. I think that would be a help if there's not a question of a sword, if you like, hanging over you, that subsequently you can be followed in a case like that. I also think on the question of people who go down the road of valuation themselves, it seems to be more about location than valuation. And because it's location, these anomalies are going to be widespread. And because it's like the first household charge that came in, people will say, if it's fair, if it's equitable, we realise we have to respond positively. We have to get the finances of the state correct. And in that particular case, I think that the idea of one particular area because of location, even though it's the same type of house, they'll have the same overheads, the same expenditure, can be paying a lot more on their particular house because of where the house is being valued. To my way of thinking, a house is a house. I also think, and I've said this many times on other financial issues here, I still believe that those who have the most should pay the most. And there is an element here, and it's not covered in the exemptions. The exemptions are too limited, they're too restricted. Even the idea of certified insolvency, where there's a mortgage involved, and we even heard this from the other side of the House as well. That's so restrictive in itself, and many, many people who are insolvent won't want to go down that road. They'll want to hold on to their property, whatever else happens. That, to me, is not a major exemption in itself. All right, the one for charities is an exemption. It's welcome. It's well thought out and was needed. It's still very, very limited. But what about the people who can't pay? They just, all these statistics we have at the moment show that there's a major number of people in this country that when they've paid the bare necessities, do not have any money left at the end of a week or at the end of a month. All right, we can talk about deferral, but deferral in a way is like borrowing another mortgage that you can't pay for. And I think even at this stage, we should add to the number of exemptions which exist. Senator Fergal Quinn has put forward some ideas, but I think it should be even broader than that. And the reason I say it is that we're still working against the protest mentality that's out there since the first household charge. We're still working against that at this moment. And I believe people should pay what they have to pay. I accept that. But I still think we'd make a better job of it if it became very clear that it wasn't punitive to the point that people who were maybe on a very limited figure, not able to pay, can have it deducted at source in certain cases. Even that in itself, to me, it's a little bit penal, if you like, and again sends out the wrong message and doesn't make the doesn't make the implementation of this easy. I know we've advanced the legislation a lot, but the points I would still be making to you that you might just again look at that issue of the valuation. You might again look at broadening the exemptions, because I do believe there's scope for that without undermining the basic thing you have to do. And the overall valuation, even if it's not implemented in the first year, I think the manner of arriving at a valuation based on location is in a way not necessarily the right way to go. But I wouldn't like to see people who are not in a position to pay, who are already suffering, frustrated, angry. I wouldn't like any extra pressure because, and I don't want to be alarmist in this, we have a very high suicide rate in this country. I know of a number of cases, nothing to do with this particular tax, where there were suicides directly connected to financial issues. There's no question about that. Some of them were very, very sad and very worrying. Let's make sure we don't create that environment. to drive people over the cliff. I don't think the Minister wants that. I don't believe the government wants that. But I think together there is a time for a bipartisan approach. And this is one of the occasions, if we can work on the difficulties, the anomalies and the inequities, that we could still fine-tune this, even though it will never be popular.
Senator Morris Cummins. Senator Morris Cummins. 4 minutes, Senator.
Thank you, Caherly. Really, I've listened to the same suspects here advocating about the local property tax the same way as they did about the household charges and indeed septic tanks in this House. And they're the very people who have inflicted extra charges onto those very people, advocating that they wouldn't pay their